Hello, everybody. We just are working on an assignment today, Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. Had you guys do an assignment, but just wanted to kind of go over this, kind of clear up a couple things, with your readings, make sure we're all on the same page with your assignments and whatnot. So, really, you had the first two political parties of our young nation. So we talked about, on Wednesday, the Articles of Confederation, our first national government. Well, as we learned, the articles was very, very, very weak. Again, states had more power than the national government. Um, Shays' rebellion is going to expose a lot of those problems. So eventually they'll need to be changed. So, what change is going to happen? So that's ultimately it's going to be the $1 million question. Well, there began factions that started happening in the U.S. government. You had some people believed that we should have a strong national government. States should be weak. Others believe that states should be, a little stronger, with a weak national government. So you had two different viewpoints. You had two different groups of people that believed in two very, very different things, and ultimately that led into the first two political parties. Kind of see where we're at today. Again, we still have two major political parties to this very day, and this will lead into a very fierce debate between these two parties on which direction the U.S. is going to head. So, in your assignments, you have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So, who were they, and what was their main idea? So, the Federalists, they believed in the new Constitution that was going to be drafted. So, they did not like the Articles. They believed that we needed to change that, and they supported this new drafting of the U.S. Constitution. And then you had the Anti-Federalists. So think of anti-federal government. They did not support this new Constitution that was written to replace the Articles. So in the U.S. Constitution, they were going to give more power to the national government, less power to the state. So ultimately kind of flip the model of the Articles. You're not going to have the national government on top making all the major decisions, and not so much the states. Now, the states will have some power, but not as much as the federal government would. So this scared a lot of people, more specifically the Anti-Federalists. So they did not support this new drafting of the Constitution. So what was their point of view? Let's start off with the Federalists first. So again, as I said, they supported ratifying this new Constitution. They wanted to support it. They thought it took the measures that it needed for the national government to move forward and to get stronger. So they favored a stronger national government. They favored three branches of government, each branch with equal power. This should sound very familiar to what we have today. We have the executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. They are all equal. They all share power. Not one branch is above the other. So that's ultimately what the Federalists are going to believe in, dividing up government into three branches of all equal power. Now, why? Because they also were fearful of having one person have all the power. Think back to the Articles. The Articles only had one government, or one branch. Which was the legislative branch. So they thought that, take their power, divide it up amongst the courts and amongst and also create a presidency. So they also favored one president, having a system where you have one president in power. They believe in a system called separation of powers, where you take each branch, you take the branches, you separate them, you make them all equal, and you give them a specific job to do. So again, the executive president, they're enforcing the laws. The legislative branch, they make the laws. And the judicial branch, they interpret the laws. Again, checks and balances, that means that you have a system in place to make sure that each branch can check the other one. So again, Congress can make laws, but the Supreme Court can veto those, or they can rule those laws unconstitutional. So for instance, Congress passes a law, all blondes can't drive. Okay, theoretically in their power, they can create that law, but Supreme Court say, you know what, that law is unconstitutional, it's unfair. The president can veto that law. So there are checks on that power. So that's what a checks and balance means. So here's another big thing, and very important. The Federalists believed that as the drafting was written, you didn't need to have a Bill of Rights in there. You didn't need to have your first 10 amendments. They said it was not needed. It was kind of just, kind of went without saying that people should have, inherent rights of life, liberty, property. It wasn't necessary to write it in. All right, so let's go to the Anti-Federalist position. They opposed ratifying the Constitution. They didn't think, as it was written, they were fearful of it. They thought it gave too much power to the national government. So they favored stronger state governments. That, again, state government should be stronger than the national government. They also, I guess, if you want to, they agreed that you should have three different. So the Federalists and Anti-Federalists agreed that there should be three branches of government. However, they believe that the legislative branch should be the most powerful of the three. So that's a difference there between the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists wanted all of them to be equal, and the Anti-Federalists wanted Congress to have more power. They opposed a one-person executive. They wanted multiple people to hold that office because they were very fearful of having, if you have one president, that would be just like having another king. They believed the nation was too large and diverse to agree, so that's why they believed that national government was pointless. They believed that each state, each region of the United States was very different, had different needs, different wants, and that's why they wanted states to have more power, to have the people in those states choose for themselves, what they needed, what they wanted, what they needed to vote on. Whereas a national government, how can you truly get a pulse on what each region of the country wants? Now, here's another big thing, very, very, very important, is that the Anti-Federalists demanded. So in the original document of the U.S. Constitution, there was no Bill of Rights. And this scared the Anti-Federalists so much. Again, they were afraid of strong national government. So this was like their big point. They insisted that they needed to have a Bill of Rights written in the Constitution. They would not send any bill unless they had the Bill of Rights in there. So that was a big hanging point there. So here's some people you probably have heard before. Federalists. You have Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, George Washington were very key members of the Federalist Party. And then on the Anti-Federalists, you have Patrick Henry, John Hancock, Sam Adams, George Mason, Edmund Randolph. Some of those names you probably heard of before. That was in the Anti-Federalist side. So James Madison was known as the father of the Constitution because he kind of had his hands in a lot of things. He had the Virginia Plan, which you'll learn more about in government. I'm not going to go too much into that. He also wrote the Bill of Rights. He wrote many Federalist papers that argued for their points. So very key influential figure. So again, just to kind of, if you haven't gotten this already, this is kind of what you should have in there, kind of, what they both agreed on. So they agreed upon, so both sides agreed that they both needed to have a stronger national government. Now, the question was how strong. So obviously both parties were well aware the articles didn't work. And the Anti-Federalists knew they had to give up some powers to get the national government. The question was how much. So that's kind of what they disagreed upon. So you can kind of go through this and kind of see it for yourselves if you're having an issue, having a hard time, kind of what the key differences were. So hopefully this makes sense for you. All right, now kind of going into the Constitution component of the notes. So what is the Constitution? Where did it come from? Well, again, as we talked about before, Shays' Rebellion, brought to light a lot of the key problems with the Articles. You had the uprising of farmers in Massachusetts, led by Daniel Shay. Helped convince leaders that a strong central government was needed because you had these riots going on in Massachusetts, and the state governments, they were afraid. Well, what if this happened to us? Are they going to be equipped? Are they going to be equipped to handle like large scale riots? And if there was no national army, you can't rely on the national army to help you. You're kind of fending for yourself. So this really made a lot of people think, well, should we give more power to the national government? And this led to the creation and the writing of the Constitution. So in May of 1787, delegates from each state sent delegates to talk about this new Constitution. Through discussions and debate over issues like states' rights, individual rights, and the power of the national government, a compromise was made, and the result became something called the Law of the Land, which is the U.S. Constitution. So what does the U.S. Constitution mean? It's the sacred law of the land. That's what all of our laws, all of our structures of government is all located in this document. What makes our government tick, the outlining of our government is all in there. So again, the father of the Constitution was James Madison. All right, so they met in Philadelphia. These delegates met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and their original intent was to revise the Articles, revise it. But eventually, some debates ensued, and they agreed that the way the Articles was written, it was almost impossible to amend it. Now, think back to that rule. You need 13 states to all amend it. Well, 13 states weren't going to agree. So ultimately, they agreed to basically scrap the revision and create a whole new document. So really, from May for several months, they were basically locked in a room, held to secrecy, and they were drafting this new constitution, where the greatest men at this time in our country in the colonies were all there providing their input. So again, as I mentioned, Constitution. This is supreme law of the land. This outlines our structure of our nation's government, laws, and human rights. So in this document, you have really a few key points, a few key sections. One is the preamble. The preamble is the introduction of the Constitution. It starts as "We the people," showing that the people have the power in our country, that democracy and government are going to, reign true in our government and have that power through elections. Two, important, Bill of Rights was also added to the Constitution as well. These are the first 10 amendments. So, First Amendment, freedom of speech and religion, assembly, petition, press. Second Amendment, right to bear arms. Third Amendment, no quartering of soldiers. Fourth Amendment, no legal searches and seizures. So those are documents that protect us from the government. We're guaranteed those rights. So that was something that the Anti-Federalists really fought for. So again, that's called the Bill of Rights. That's in the Constitution. Now, again, the Bill of Rights is in the Constitution. It's a part of it. So I wanted to make that clear. So again, you see some of these here, the Bill of Rights. You can kind of read through those. You can, pause this and look through it more closely. I wouldn't be familiar with, with at least the First Amendment and the Second Amendment, the Fourth. Those are, pretty important. So other key, as I mentioned before, I mentioned a few terms: separation of powers. So this is what I talked about before. Each side, Anti-Federalists and Federalists, believe that you needed to separate the powers. You need to take the powers that once belonged to the king and separate them out into three branches. That part they did agree upon. So that's what separation of powers means. Take powers, divide them up into three different branches. So they have the branches right there. Legislative branch, right there. Congress make laws. Executive branch, that's the president. They enforce the laws. And the judicial branch is the Supreme Court, and they interpret the laws of the land, make sure they're constitutional. And we have something called the checks and balances I mentioned before. So this is a system where each branch of government can restrain other branches. So Congress has the power to make a law, but the president can veto that law. So that would be an example of a checks and balance. All right, so we'll do the rest later. So that is it for today. So let me know if you have any questions. But again, the assignment should have been pretty straightforward, pretty clear. There's a Federalist assignment you guys had to fill out. There's an exit ticket that you guys need to complete. All right. Anyway, hope all is well. Let me know if you have any questions.